Morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
At this time, I want to call the March 24th special call meeting of the Nash County Board of Commissioners to order. On behalf of the commissioners and the staff, I want to welcome everyone to the meeting. We begin our meeting with an invocation and a pledge of allegiance to the flag. For the invocation, you're welcome to stand and join us, or you're welcome to have your own individual prayer, or you can use this time for a moment of silence. Commissioner Sue Leggett will give the invocation, after which I will lead in the Pledge of Allegiance. Sue?
Let us pray. Dear Lord, we come to you today with humble hearts as citizens of Nash County, but more importantly, we know that we serve you first and your kingdom. Lord, we ask for your presence as we conduct the business of the county. Please give us the wisdom and grace needed to make the right decisions. We also ask your blessings over the people of Nash County. These things we ask in your precious and holy name. Amen.
Amen. Would you join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd mentioned that Commissioner Belfield had a previous commitment, could not be with us today, and if Madam Clerk, if you would just note that in the minutes. We will now move to agenda item number 4. which is a closed session for the purpose of economic development. Is there a motion to go into closed session for this purpose?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Leggett, second.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Howell. All in favor indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. Mr. Gaynor, do we expect any action today coming out of closed session other than continuing this meeting with items 6 and 7?
Just continuing.
Thanks, sir. We will now move into closed session.
Do you hear it there? You can hear it through the main speaker? Test, test. What's going on? Okay, go ahead. It's a closed session.
Nash County C&D Cell Expansion Change Order 1. Public Utilities and Facilities Director Mike Phillips will present the request. Good morning, Mike.
Morning. Thank y'all for having me. Attached is change order 1 related to Nash County C&D expansion project. This change order addresses stormwater erosion control issues on the active C&D cell at the Nash County landfill. Each item is outlined in the change order, but the most significant items are improvements to an existing drop inlet, grading along cell perimeter ditches, riprap replacement, and stabilization and erosion control matting and seeding. Approval of this change order results in an increase of $52,095 for an amended contract amount of $798,942, and no change in contract time. Based on the above, it is recommended Nash County Board of Commissioners approve the attached change order and authorize the county manager to execute same on behalf of the county. If you have any questions.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the change order and authorize the county manager to execute same?
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
Motion by Commissioner Leggett, second.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Howell. Assuming no further discussion, all in favor indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Now move to agenda item number 7. I guess, yeah, we got our people here. Regional Wastewater Committee presentation, calling Brian Johnson. Good morning, Brian. Will you have anyone else with you today from the Wooten Company? Okay, good to have you here. This, just mentioned this is an informational item only, talking about the regional wastewater treatment plant. Morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good to see y'all, and happy Monday morning. All right. We're here to talk this morning about Southern Nash County regional wastewater system, and like the chairman said, this is more informational, just to kind of get y'all informed about where we are in the process. Y'all may recall I was here back in June of last year, and as we were finishing a study to sort of started the process, if you will. All right, well, let's go ahead. What I'm going to talk about today is going to go over some background information, and then we'll get into what we're working on now, which is the PER, and that is preliminary engineering report. We'll then get into the timeline of where things are headed, and then certainly any questions. And I'll just say, if there's any questions as we go along here, feel free to interrupt me, and we'll talk about them right then while it's on your mind. That's no problem at all, because we will be covering a lot of information. I'm going to move through it, but again, stop me as you need to, and we'll cover it at that point. Okay. So first start off with some background information and an overview. So the way this has been talked about, I believe, for a number of years, but the southern part of the county has a wastewater disposal constraints, let's say. So you've got several situations going on down there. You've got the town of Bailey is probably the most pressing, and they've been under moratorium now for over 20 years. And meaning they've not been able to discharge or grow because they can't expand their wastewater discharge. In addition to that, you've got the Middlesex Corporate Center that the county's been very involved with, and of course trying to grow that corporate center down there. At this point, it's been certainly a success, but you've been limited by the amount of wastewater that's available within the town of Middlesex. There's only so much available. They're currently served by the city of Raleigh. They pump west. So there's disposal needs down there. How are we going to deal with this? Obviously, that part of the county is associated next to Wake County. There's potential for growth down there, but again, with no wastewater, that's a limiting factor. So that's really how things got started. Over the past year or two, we've completed a merger regionalization feasibility study. We'll call that MRF for short. And that was done, like I said, we finished that up last year, and what that did is maybe a 100,000-foot look at how could we develop a disposal for that area of the county. And so we looked at quite a few, I think 4 or 5 different alternatives. The alternative that was preferred, that came out of that study, was the alternative number 3, and that is to construct a new wastewater treatment plant along the Tar River. And essentially, what would happen there is each entity would pump to that new plant. So that would include Nash County. The members would include Nash County, towns of Bailey, Middlesex, potentially Spring Hope, and of course, the corporate center for the industrial flow. Now, a little bit more details about Alternative 3 and what came out of that, just to refresh y'all's memories. So what came out of that was we were looking at a 1.5 million gallon per day plant along the Tar River, and again, serves Bailey, Middlesex, and also potentially Spring Hope and larger areas within the county, like Middlesex Corporate Park. That includes, you can't really see the map too well, but the green lines essentially on your map there, those are conveyance lines, force main lines, and that would pump wastewater from Middlesex over to Bailey. Then it would be another pump that would pump wastewater from Bailey up to a new plant along the Tar River, which is the blue line, kind of squiggly line running from left to right. And then you can see if Spring Hope were to come online, how another pump station would be put in Spring Hope, would pump down to the plant, the new plant. So that was the layout. And the one big point on this is this was totally confined within Nash County. There's no county reliance on anybody outside the county, so it's solely within the confines of Nash County and allows for smart growth, economic opportunities. Okay, so what are the next steps? What were the next steps? We needed to develop a little bit further into, or dig a little further into alternative number 3. And, we're at 100,000 foot at the end of this study. What we want to do is now bring it down to 50 or 30,000 and start really doing a little bit more fine tuning on that alternative. So the next step then is a preliminary engineering report. And I like to refer to this as sort of the roadmap. If we were going to develop this alternative, how would we get there? And this entails a lot of different components. Cost being one. How we're going to get funding. How is it going to be organized? What are the treatment options? All these kinds of things. So that's what the PER is. And then, so the county applied for last year some planning money from the state, from the Division of Water Infrastructure, DWI, and received that $400,000 to study this further. So that's basically what we're doing right now, is we're studying that and using those funds to take a deeper look at that. Okay, so now I'm going to dive a little more into the PER and what we're particularly looking at currently. The first thing, and really one of the most important things, I think, is the capacity. How big does this plant really need to be? And what entities are included and makes up that? That's a big part of that question, or a big part of that answer to that question, I should say. So the flows, they're largely based on population projections. Now, as we just mentioned, the town of Bailey has been under moratorium, and so that makes their projections a little bit tricky. It's hard to rely on that because they've really had no major growth in that town. So what we've had to do is look at neighboring communities and see how those have grown, and then talk to the town and try to balance that out. The other is the industrial flows. For Middlesex Corporate Center, for example, those are also somewhat I say tricky. Nobody knows the crystal ball in terms of what type of establishment may come there, but obviously if you're limited on the amount of wastewater, then that limits you to the amount of entities that can come there. So essentially those are two big components, and then of course if Spring Hope were to come on board. So right now what we're looking at is a tentative capacity of 1.99 million gallons a day, and I'll talk about why that number is what it is in just a minute. But that's where we're currently sitting. Some other things we're looking at with the PER are the siting of the plant. You can see I've got a picture there, and this is the last picture for a while, and I apologize for that. But a lot of words on these next slides. But anyway, we've got a picture here that shows the existing Nash Middle School. And just north of that middle school You have a potential site for this new plant. You can see the yellow components of that on that slide. Those are the layout, a rough layout of what the new plant could look like. And then, I didn't show it, but the force main routing really hasn't changed from what we were looking at in the MRF study. So generally, that would be along Highway 264 business and then along Highway 581. So the major routes is where those that force main would go. Now, we'll also be locating those force mains on the opposite sides, of course, of the existing utilities. Like, for example, the county has a water main running up 581 on the west side, so we would be on the east side of that route. Okay. Other things we're looking at is essentially a process of refining the parameters. You know, we've already talked about capacity or flow. We've talked about location. Cost, you know, the larger we make this, of course, the more costly, so it's that balance. We want to strike that appropriate balance. And then the stakeholders, you know, who they are, what their needs are, and then we've talked about the routes. We also need to understand the constraints such as where are there environmental concerns, wetlands, historical properties, endangered species, this IBT, which we'll talk about in just a second, innovation transfer, a lot of different constraints that need to go into what can make a successful system. And then finally, the actual treatment process itself, we're looking at alternatives there. We're just getting into that now, but there's several different options that we can look at to best serve. You know, do we want the cutting edge technology? Do we want the older conventional technology? What type of technology do we really want and need to serve the county and the stakeholders best in the future? Okay, so one of the I won't call it a constraint, but it is sort of a constraint, is this idea of nutrient loadings and credits and disposal. So essentially, when you develop a new wastewater plant in North Carolina, you need to understand what are the limits you're going to be held to by the state to treat. You know, how stringent are those limits going to be to discharge or dispose of your effluent wastewater into a receiving body. In this case, we're talking about the Tar River. So the Tar and the Tar-Pamlico River Basin is what they call nutrient-sensitive waters. And what that basically means is the state is going to regulate total nitrogen and total phosphorus. Those are, in larger quantities, those are harmful to the environment, and so the state's going to regulate those. And so the county, if we're placing a wastewater plant on the Tar River, we need to understand what that means. And essentially what that means, back in 1997, I believe, is when the Tar River as well as the Neuse River went under state regulation for these nutrients. And they developed a plan to where they had so much loading that they were going to allow within these basins, loadings of nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, the Neuse River is only nitrogen, but tar is nitrogen and phosphorus. They're only going to allow so much loadings. So essentially, anything beyond the loadings, you've got to get credits for. So the county, being a new entity to this, we would have to find credits, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So one other thing that came out of that 1997 plan shortly thereafter was an entity called the Tar-Pamlico River Basin Association. And this is an association that's made up of a large amount of the local government entities in the basin. And they join together, and basically they share these credits, if you will. So anyway, that's just an introduction to the credits. Now we'll talk a little bit more about how that impacts Nash County. So to build a new plant, the county is going to have to find these credits. So the treatment technology is only going to take you down so far, and anything remaining, we got to find the credits. The preferred option would be entry into the Tar-Pamlico River Basin Association at this point. That is going to give, we believe, it's going to be the lowest cost, but also it'll provide the most amount of flexibility, and you'll be in an association with a bunch of others in the same situation, if you will, and you can work together. This does require a vote of the current association to allow Nash County and the stakeholders in. And then there may be charges, there most likely will be charges from the association, the price to get in. And we're still looking into what that is. That's basically where we are in the study right now. And, but we believe it may be back charges all the way back to potentially 1997 when the association was formed. And, but again, we're trying to get an understanding of what those costs may look like. If that does not occur, if they, for some reason, do not allow the county in, then there are state mitigation banks and private mitigation banks that we can look towards. Those are generally going to be available, but more costly. And I guess I should also mention the Tar River Basin does have credits available. So that is the good news. There are credits available right now. The state's actually reworking some of the general statutes related to the credits in the basin, and there's some leftovers, and those are going to be allocated to the association. So again, that's the preference, but there's other options if we need to go there. All right, one other thing I wanted to mention in terms of constraints, that is the interbasin transfer. And this, just to hit this real quick, not to get too down into the weeds, but essentially you've got multiple river basins in the state of North Carolina. You've got the Neuse, you've got the Tar, you've got Cape Fear, Catawba, all over the place. And the state of North Carolina regulates how much water you can pull out of one basin and then put into another basin. So that cap or that threshold is 2 million gallons a day. Notice I mentioned the 1.99 million gallons a day for the capacity of the plant. So we don't want to go above that 2 million gallons a day. And if you think about where geographically the Southern Nash is located, the entities within Southern Nash, you've got Bailey and Middlesex and the corporate park. They're all within the Neuse River Basin, okay? They're all in the Neuse River Basin. If you think about Highway 97 in Nash County, that's kind of the basin divide of where the Neuse, everything south of there roughly is Neuse, everything north of there is Tar Basin. So the plant that we're proposing is going to be in the Tar. So everything's going to pump up to the Tar and from the Neuse and then discharge in the Tar. So again, you've got this 2 million gallons a day limitation. Now Spring Hope or anything north up there, the school, middle school, all that would be in the Tar, so there'd be no constraint on that at all. Just anything coming out of the Neuse. So that's another thing we're having to keep an eye on and make sure that we're not going beyond. Now, the question might come up, well, is there ever a way to go beyond the 2? Yes, there is a process that can be gone through. It's a lengthy process. Could take years, 3 to 5 years to go through that process. But it is allowable. There's other entities that have done it. But again, in this case, it doesn't look like we're going to need to do it for quite some time, if ever. So anyway, but I just wanted to mention that to you. All right, one other thing we're looking at, of course, in this study is how is this new system going to be governed? Is it going to be a function of the county or some other entity? Of course, there are multiple stakeholders involved in this, and so one option could be for it to remain with the county, but another option could be there's other options out there, and we've got to think about the ownership and the responsibilities there. What would that owner be responsible for doing? We do know that they would be responsible for maintaining the assets and operating the assets. So you're going to have pump stations, you're going to have a wastewater plant, you're going to have force mains, you're going to have compliance issues to deal with each year, permitting issues to deal with each year. So who's going to handle all that? So again, I mentioned the county is an option, but what we've been looking at and talking about with the stakeholders most recently are other options, and there's other options provided by the general statutes, 162A to be precise, in North Carolina. One of those options is the Water and Sewer Authority option, and then the other is the Metropolitan Sewerage District option. I'm going to walk you through each one of these at a relatively high level and just give you a taste of what each one of these would allow and what they wouldn't allow. All right? Water and Sewer Authority is the first one. And what I'll say by this one, you know, if you think about, you may not even realize how popular these are. There's a lot of these across the state if you start thinking about it. So some ones that may be close to Nash County, down by Kinston, you've got Neuse Regional WASA, let's say. We'll call it WASA for short. And then up in Granville County, you've got Southern Granville or South Granville WASA. So those are two pretty close. You've got Onslow, or I call it ONWASA, O-N WASA. You've got Cape Fear WASA, that's down around Wilmington. So you've got a bunch of these across this part of the state, and it's a pretty popular option. To form this authority, what you would need to do is each entity would need to pass a resolution, and that resolution would need to include the articles of incorporation. There'd have to be a public hearing involved, but each political body that wants to join the authority would have to adopt a resolution saying they want to do so. Once all that's in place, you would send that to the Secretary of State. Secretary of State would then certify that, sign off on that, and basically issue a certificate of incorporation, and therefore you would be formed. Now, I do want to make mention that just because you're formed doesn't mean you're ready to go to work at that point. There's a lot to do, from that point, and that is, number one, you got to think about the bylaws. You know, what are the regulations? How are you going to run this organization? You know, what are the members going to look like? How many seats on the board? Who's going to be those members? You've got to hire staff to run it. You know, this is no longer a county entity. This is an authority, right? So you got to have staff. You've got to have, you got to develop a budget. You got to do all the things that a government body does, but you got to do it as an authority, because it's a separate entity at this point. You've got to work on agreements with other entities. You know, what is the authority going to do? The authority is going to, in this case, and I should have mentioned this earlier, the authority or the idea behind this whole, the premise behind this entire study and system is that this particular body would only be responsible for the conveyance and the treatment and the disposal of the wastewater. So the towns of Bailey and Middlesex, and if Spring Hope comes in them, they would continue to maintain and operate and own their systems within their town. So this authority, if we went that way, would only be responsible for the conveyance from the town up to the plant, running the plant, and then everything associated with that. But again, there's a lot to do to make it a functioning authority, for sure. All right, so the board makeup, generally that's by proportion of the members involved. That could be different population, that could be demand, you know, that they're taking up. It could be a bunch of different ways you could look at that, but it's appointed in proportion by each political body. So what powers does an authority have? An authority, number one, needs to work on the bylaws of the authority and make sure that it's doing what it needs to do. The authority can issue revenue bonds, you know, similar to a county. It can also issue revenue bonds. It can collect on rates. It can collect on fees, like system development fees. It can even charge other special assessments. For example, if somebody is close to the line that y'all have out in a particular area and they're not tapping on, you can assess that individual. You can exercise the right of eminent domain. And then finally, you can receive and accept federal, state, and other funding to help develop the infrastructure. So again, there's a lot that an authority can do, for sure. Okay, the Metropolitan Sewerage District, MSD for short. Let me give you a few examples of this. There's not quite as many of these, but they are around. And the closest one here to Nash that I'm aware of is Contentnia MSD, and that's over between Kinston and Greenville on Highway 11. That's made up by the towns of Grifton, Winterville, and Ayden. So, and then you may be familiar with Buncombe County out in Asheville. They also have an MSD. So that's how they're governed. So again, it's not quite as popular as the authority, but it is out there, and it is also a good form of governance. So how does this get formed? Well, you still need a resolution from each political body supporting it. Now one difference is you've got to define it a little more precisely. You've got to map out the boundaries of, as I understand general statute, of this particular district. If there's any unincorporated areas within the district, for example, out in the county, then you've got to get a petition signed by 51% of the qualified voters, okay? So in addition to the resolutions, you got to have this petition that goes hand in hand with it. Those, instead of going to the Secretary of State, you submit that to the Environmental Management Commission. The Environmental Management Commission will then hold a public hearing. Assume everything goes well there, they will then form legally the district on behalf of the entities. Now, since this is more of a county, as I read the general statute, this is more of a county-type setup, and so the county would get 3 board members, and then there would be 1 other from each other political body. I don't know, this would be a legal question that I'm not qualified to answer, but I don't know if there's other ways that may be structured, but that's the way I read the general statute currently. So what are the powers of a MSD? Very similar to the authority, but there are a couple big differences. You still need to do the bylaws. One of the big differences is general obligation bonds. Instead of just being able to issue revenue bonds, you can actually issue GO bonds. So that's just like the county can. So it basically mirrors what the county can do. You can also, in addition to the rates and the fees and the special assessments that I mentioned with the authority, this particular district can also assess taxes, just like the county. So that's a lot more, gives a lot more flexibility to a district in this particular case. You still exercise the right of eminent domain, and you also can still receive and accept federal, state, and other funding. All right, moving right along here. So what is all this going to cost? And these are still being refined. This is just, again, where we are. This is not the end-all, be-all, but I just want to give you some approximate. At the end of the MRF study, we were at $83 million, and that was for a 1.5 MGD plant. We're looking now at 1.99, so we bumped up the cost a little bit. And also continued trying to account for best we can for inflation. So we're in the neighborhood of 95 to 115 million right now is where things sit. So obviously from a success standpoint, we want to maximize the amount of grant dollars or appropriated dollars that could be obtained. That will keep your user costs down and much more reasonable to the end user. So we've got their potential funding sources. Obviously, state appropriations is a good source. Anytime that has not been around, or it was around a long time, then it went away, and now it seems to be that it may be back a little bit. Federal appropriations are another source, and then more traditional funding mechanisms such as USDA. USDA, Department of Agriculture, is a federal agency, of course. This being a new entity, per se, a new formed entity, it may be advantageous. We need to check with USDA to get a little bit more, but it may be advantageous from USDA for grant dollars because of that, as opposed to if the county were to go out and apply to USDA, probably not quite as much grant would be available. It would be more of a loan situation. DWI is the state funding arm for water and wastewater systems. And they would be another good one, but again, right now, they're very much leaning back towards loans. We've just come through this whole ARPA funding from the federal government, and everybody's very used to having grant dollars, but the state model is not so much based on grant dollars, it's more based on loan dollars. So that's where that is. So anyway, that's certainly a major consideration for the success of the project is how much it's going to cost and getting funding in place for it. All right, last set of slides here, and that's the timeline. And where are we heading? So this is the PER, a table just showing the PER components, and this is like I said, the current effort that we're working on. And we've been working through, we're going into the April, so we've completed the first couple items, and now we're looking at finalizing the capacity, which we've talked about, and then the wastewater treatment alternatives, we're looking at that, and we're hoping to kind of close that out for the most part next month. We're going to decide on the preferred alternative and finalize our component sizing in May. Then in June, we'll complete the financial analysis and hope to have a determination on which type of governance wants to be pursued. And what needs to happen there, at a minimum anyway, is to be included in this PERs, we need to have a memorandum of understanding from each entity or a letter of intent that says if this goes forward, we, the town of X, agree that we want to be a part of it. Or we, the county, wants to be a part of that. So we need to at least at a minimum have those memorandums in place to be able to put into the PER. And then finally, we'll wrap everything up hopefully in July of this year and send to the county for final review and approval. And once that happens, then we will move on to the state and send it to DWI, which is who's funding the project, and make sure that they are okay with it. Now, we have been talking with them all along, and so we're hopeful that when we get to that point, there's no surprises, but we do have to send to them for final concurrence at the end of this. And that'll take us through the fall of this year. So fall of 2025, we feel like to get that approval from DWI. So once we get that approval, what comes next? When I did green on this slide, it looked better, but here, I don't know if I'm colorblind or what, but it's hard to see the green. So the reason I've got green there, if you can see the green, those first 4 items are green, and they are what I call things that can be going on simultaneously. So the first one is begin the preliminary design. So we've done the PER at this point, so then you can actually start doing the first part of what I call the nuts and bolts, starting to put together the preliminary design. At the same time, we can continue to be working on securing that funding. That's a big deal. And then also working further onto the governance idea. You know, those things that I mentioned, we may go ahead and form a particular type of entity, but we still got to work on how it all is going to operate. And then also securing the entry into the Tar-Pamlico River Basin Association. And I've got question marks on the timing of all these. Obviously, funding, that could take no time, depending on if we hit the timing right, or it could take a long time, depending on, because it's obviously a lot of capital that's got to be found. And then once we can kind of go through those processes, and we feel like the money is going to be in place, or we'll find the money, and we feel like we know what entity is going to be governing the organization, we can move forward into final design. That final design should take about 6 to 8 months. We'll get into permitting after that. Permitting, I've got what they call authorization to construct, A to C, and the MPDS permit, that's basically your authorization to discharge into the Tar River. That's the big one. And then other permits along with that. And that'll take 3 to 12 months. And the reason I've got 12 months, that MPDS that's the longer lead time there. Most of your permitting will only take about 2 to 3 months, but that MPDS could take up to a year is what we're seeing currently. And then finally, we'll get into your traditional bidding and construction. We've got construction 18 months for this type of project. So all total, so to get us to the end line, again, all things fell in place. Optimistically, we might get there in 3 years. On the outside, it may be 5 years, so 2028 to 2030. It'll be here before you know it, though, the way time goes. But that's a look out ahead of where things will go beyond the current effort that we're doing. With that, I'm finished with my formal presentation, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that y'all may have.
Floor is open for questions to Mr. Johnson. Commissioner Leggett.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate the information and the depth of the information. Very, very helpful. Just help me understand a little bit. So this is a study so far, not yet a proposal. So when we're talking about building this wastewater treatment plant, so the current customers proposed would be the town of Bailey, town of Middlesex, perhaps Spring Hope, the Middlesex Corporate Center. Would those be enough to support this plant, or would the plant be also hinging on additional residential development out in the county to justify its building?
That's a good question. So when we get into the financial evaluation a little more, we'll be able to see sort of what you like to look at is what would be a user rate, right? So if we brought in just the entities that you mentioned there, and we ran the financial model based on a, $115 million, let's say, with all loan dollars, then that could be a very, very high user rate. And so what essentially is going to happen is let's call it the entity, because we don't know yet if it's authority or otherwise, but the entity would charge Spring Hope, Bailey, Middlesex a bulk rate for using their, disposing of the wastewater. And so that bulk rate would be so many dollars per 1,000 gallons, and that rate is going to have to be set to cover the cost of the entity. So, the more, I would say if we get a lot of grant dollars, then that helps a lot, and you don't have to have as much growth, if you will. But yes, definitely, the more growth you do have in the future in the entities, or in the different towns in the county, that's going to help keep those costs down. So I won't say it hinges on it. I'd say the grant dollars really is a critical part in making this thing work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Wilkins.
I've always said it's the little words that matter.
Okay.
And you said the potential to also serve Spring Hope and larger unincorporated areas, but what's the probability that it would?
Well, it'll be set up to where it can. Capacity-wise, there'll be some capacity in there. As far as the conveyance system that's going along there to the plant, there's capacity in there for other entities to come on. I don't think the county necessarily is looking at developing necessarily, letting a lot of development go in the county, but that's something that could happen. So will it happen, though? That will be up to the body of to this body, but also the entity body as well, what they want to allow.
But it would be able to accommodate if...
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It would be able to accommodate.
Other questions?
Comment, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Howell?
Just to piggyback on what she just stated, so I think there's the initial systems that's out there, each of the municipalities would like to keep those systems and utilize those. Bailey's currently in repair of those to help get them off the moratorium, but the growth potential for their existing system is not really much, and once they come off, what they have is going to get used up immediately. Spring Hope has already done repairs on their system, and they have some growth opportunity there for residential, but what's limiting them back is going to be the industrial commercial side. So what really Spring Hope's interest is in this is to allow them the ability to do economical growth as well within the city limits of Spring Hope and bring in industrial commercial. Middlesex, as he mentioned earlier, they're purchasing all of their wastewater now from the town of Raleigh or city of Raleigh. And there's limitations there. And if we go back to the presentation that he presented in June of last year, the county actually asked for and planned for 300,000 gallons per day for the Middlesex complex just alone. And that's not including the new site that we have set up now, which is the 5-county one, which was the Amos site that's now been recalled the 5-county site. So there's no consideration in this 300,000 that was asked for originally for that site. So that's another economic development that's looking like it's going to move forward pretty quickly as well. So they're constrained there with this growth opportunity with economic development by not having that sewer. So they all want to use what they're currently using, but this is going to continue the growth in that end of the county within the city limits for commercial, industrial, and residential. And based on the presentation that was made in June as well, it's my understanding for the county use on this, we're looking at this to use it as an economic driver for industrial commercial as well, not specifically for residential, but we're utilizing it for these other sites that we're looking at building to drive economic growth in the county, to promote more smart growth in our cities.
Other questions? Commissioner Davis?
Well,
I'm sorry.
since this is,
Go ahead, Commissioner Aaron. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Aaron. No, go ahead.
all right, well, since this is, I kind of want you to kind of give me an idea of how the taxing and funding of similar systems have been, because, say, people in my district who will not really benefit from this southern regional waste system will want to know whether they are going to be paying for it. And that'll be a big concern, that since the county is going to be involved in the building, how will they be able to differentiate the citizens who are not going to benefit from it, help pay for it?
That's a great question. So you have to look at each different governance option that I mentioned. So let's take the authority as the first one. So the authority is going to only be supporting, is only going to get its revenue through the users that are going to be tied to it. So, again, Spring Hope, if they come, Bailey and Middlesex, and the county, as it relates to the commercial or the Middlesex Corporate Center. So it's only those users that you would be charging. So anybody else in the county that doesn't use the system would not get a bill or not see this at all, really, because it'll be a separate entity. If you go to the other option, the taxing option, is sort of the same way. That has got to be defined. So it's only those, I don't think you would want to open this up to the entire county. You would only open it to a specific area down in the southern part of the county. And so, same way though, the Metropolitan Sewage District would collect user fees. That's the primary vehicle to pay for all that. It wouldn't affect anybody else in the county. If it ever had to get to a point where it quote, taxed somebody, and I don't think I've really ever seen that. Certainly it's happened, I'm sure, but I've not run across that. But if that ever happened, it would only be taxing in that district. So it would not be the rest of the county.
Okay, just one more question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Aaron.
So the next question is, they would say, would they be have any financial responsibility for building it?
No. Good question. No, sir. Again, it would only be tied to those end users. So you would seek funding. You being the entity would seek funding. And once that funding's in place, it really doesn't affect the rest of the county. It's sort of similar to, and the county right now has the Central Nash Water and Sewer District that was developed 20-plus years ago. And it's sort of similar to that. That's a defined area within the county, down along, coming out of Rocky Mount and south of Nashville. It just affects those folks. So anywhere else in the county, they're not really affected by what happens in that district.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's important that citizens understand who's paying for what.
Yes, sir.
One thing I'd like to clarify, and Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong. So if we got into a situation, and Brian's floated a number of 95 to 115 million, and we found some state grants, we found some federal grants, we found some loan dollars, and all those funds totaled up were, let's say they're 90 million, and we still needed 25 million, then as members of the authority, they may have the responsibility to bring the additional capital forward to move forward with the project. So in that case, if the county were to say, okay, we decide, well, we'll take $5 million, I'm just picking a number, $5 million out of general fund to help us seed money to build the project, then in that case, really every stakeholder in Nash County would have some involvement in financing that project. So in that case, yes, members of your district could have some responsibility for helping build that plant, but, we can we could maybe talk about other examples where, whether it's schools, whether it's the Central Nash System, Northern Nash System, other countywide initiative, the Middlesex Corporate Center, where there's some county dollars involved that, the entire county helps fund those projects, those initiatives, but it may be cited in one portion of the county and primarily benefit a single portion of the county. So I wouldn't rule out a scenario where members of your district may have some responsibility for helping fund the project, but until we get further along, until we know what funding resources are available, it's kind of difficult to say with any degree of certainty how we're going to make this project a reality and what the funding is going to look like.
Commissioner Davis?
Brian, you hadn't mentioned it. I would like for you, before you close out, to tell how we are covering the proposed school in the interim period, knowing that the school is going to be finished before the treatment plant will be finished. That we do have a plan for that in place.
Yes,
So the rest of the board will understand that. And what Mr. Boone just said was really what I wanted to make sure we understood, that there is a possibility, because I've never seen one of these get funded 100% by grants. I've been doing them for many, many years, and at best, I think you're looking at maybe 75%. There was a period of time when you could get 90%. That was 20 years ago, but about 75%. And in the end, every entity in it is going to have to assume some debt to cover the rest of that. And I just want to make sure that we set the governing body up that parallels what debt each entity is holding. That's going to be very important at the way I look at it, because I think if you're assuming debt, you've got to have equal representation in how the board is appointed, knowing that that debt is in there. That's the 2 points I wanted to make, but if you whenever you see fit, at least give an idea of how we're covering the school.
Okay, yes, sir. Yes, so Mr. Davis mentions the school. Of course, I know the county plans up there. What would happen is, right now, the existing middle school is being served by a small, what you call package plant, and it's just a really small, 15,000 gallons per day versus, we're talking 1.99 million gallons a day. So it's a real small plant up there on the school site, and it currently discharges into the Tar River. So we've been in contact with DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality at the state, and asked specifically what do we need to do in this interim. They're aware of the larger project, but they know also that the school is potentially heading forward at a quicker time frame. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to provide the new school with wastewater treatment and disposal? And so what we've come up with, we're going to look at it and again, kind of go through a little feasibility exercise, but in the end, we believe it's going to come out that you're going to have another larger package plant, upwards of 30 to 40,000 gallons per day, which can handle 2 schools there on the same site. It'll still go to the Tar River just like it does now. It's so small that it'll still have to adhere to all the nutrient standards that I mentioned before, but you don't have to worry about joining the association or anything like that. So it's just a matter of being permitted, which the state has indicated would not be an issue. So that's basically the plan at this point, would be to build a new, smaller package plant right there, just in the interim. Now, in the future, when this larger plant is brought online, then it will be able to completely roll over to the new plant. So everything that's being served by that small package plant will then be able to be served by the new larger plant. So that's just an interim measure that would need to be in place depending on the timeline of the new school.
Other questions? Commissioner Howell?
Yes, sir. And correct me if I'm wrong, just want to make sure I understand this correct, but essentially, really, we're looking at 5 customers for this project. We're looking at the county, the school, and each of the municipalities is being considered, Spring Hope, Bailey, and Middlesex. So really, that's the customers of this project. It's not citizens in the county. Those are our customers, and then those municipalities and/or the school and/or the county would make the decision as far as the charging goes back, as far as how they do that within their county. And all the revenue that's generated from that will be handled by those entities. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I mean, the analogy I would use is that City of Rocky Mount currently treats our wastewater. So, I mean, we operate our system, we discharge to them, we're a wholesale customer. So those entities you mentioned would basically be wholesale customers of this entity that's created.
Yes, sir.
That's correct.
And the other thing I would urge the board to consider is we're all about economic growth, and I'm all for economic growth, but I'm all for smart economic growth. And again, I want you to go back and think about the comment I made a while ago. Back in June of last year, in the presentation that was made, we said 300,000 gallons would be needed for the Middlesex corporate complex. We're already in the process of moving forward with the 5-county project. And Jonathan, do you know what we're looking at for sewer gallons per day there?
Only thing we're focusing on right now is water, so we haven't really talked about sewer capacity.
But there'll be a significant need there.
We certainly hope so.
Okay. So, I mean, you're looking at 300,000. If we had to purchase this from Rocky Mount, do you know what that rate would be, sir?
It's a prevailing wholesale rate they charge all of their customers, so at the top of my head, I can't tell you.
Because I know I
what that number
spoke
is.
to the mayor of Middlesex, and if he had to purchase it from the city of Raleigh, you're probably looking anywhere from $9 to $10.5 million just for the county's part of that 300,000 gallons that we'll need for the Middlesex complex. Not every month, that's just to be able to have the right to discharge it. So there's cost with the development. So we are going to have skin, and I think, just to add on to what Commissioner Robbie and Commissioner Marvin said, there's going to be a cost associated with this at the end unless we can get 100% funding. And is that a reality? I don't think so. But I do think the sooner we get into this and the sooner we get started, and also by forming an organization early that's a regional organization like an authority, which is what I know that the town of Middlesex and the town of Bailey already proposed an adoption for a resolution to adopt to go with the authority. And once that's complete, they're meeting with the town of Spring Hope to have conversations with them, to have them adopt the same thing. The resolution has been presented to us to consider as well. And this would make us a regional wastewater facility, which would allow us a lot more access to grants, other than just attacking this from the county standpoint and or from a municipality standpoint. So kind of united we are, the better chance we have at getting more funding, which is going to overall reduce the cost to each one of us. So to Marvin's question or comment while ago in question about the funding, it's definitely going to be some funds, if we can't get it all, that everyone in the county is going to have to share. But I think we've already crossed that bridge when we rolled forward with the economic development plan to build the Middlesex corporate complex. And also we're looking at building the 5-county complex as well. We're going to have sewer. We can't, we don't allow today in the county for municipalities to extend their ETJ unless they can provide water and sewer. So they can't do that, but we've already engaged into expanding economic development and growth by building this, but we really don't have the sewer that we need. So to me, this is not really an option, it's a must. It's just how can we get there and get there as quick as possible, get there to where it's as smart as possible, and get there to where it's financially as feasible as possible for all parties involved.
Other questions? Commissioner Davis?
I don't disagree with anything Commissioner Howell stated, other than the timeline involved. We as a county are no ways near deciding what the governor option for passing a resolution. Because if we're going to be stewards of our taxpayers' funds throughout the county, we must know what the end cost is going to be. We must know what the split is before we pass any resolution. We must know who the entities are that are going to be involved in it. We know who 2 of them are. And of course, we understand that the school situation is the county situation. That's one and the same because they don't have taxing authority. Their money comes from the county. Therefore, the county has lined out 2 parts in it, but we can really look at it as one part. We've got to provide the school with an option for sewer. So we've got to get to the end of this study. We've probably got to do a lot more homework before we determine what cost is. And certainly, I wouldn't be able to vote for any resolution until I knew what the consequences of the numbers were at the end of it.
I don't think we're looking at a resolution today anyway.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make one other comment. I think Brian alluded to it in his presentation, and Commissioner Davis' comments made me think about it. Yeah, as we're looking at this preferred alternative, and again, not knowing, Bailey and Middlesex certainly seem to be willing to move forward. Spring Hope, as Commissioner Howell mentioned, is those representatives from those towns going to meet with representatives in Spring Hope and hopefully maybe help address some of their concerns. But in terms of phasing this project and looking at financials, another alternative that we need to flesh out is what does the system look like if Spring Hope elects not to participate on the front end. That would help us in that there's some infrastructure there we would have to build, lift stations and force mains, which is going to reduce that capital requirement up front to build the project. But that also brings a different set of potential financial implications. So that's another variable in the study that we need to evaluate. There could be multiple phases to this project, and that would be the simplest one to the south, to Bailey, Middlesex, those areas in the Neuse Basin, and Spring Hope come on at a later point in time if they so choose. And that's something that the association or the district or whatever entity stood up is willing to entertain at that time. So again, there's a number of variables still in play that we'll have to try to anticipate and flesh out and look at our crystal ball as best we can, as we're preparing this financial analysis. But there's a lot of unknowns. There's some known unknowns and there's some unknown unknowns, and we're still working on those.
Other questions?
Just
Commissioner Harrington?
one last statement. Okay, I agree that, yes, we need wastewater treatment in the southern part of the county. And we understand that once the authority is set up, that they will do the taxing for the customers. But my big concern is getting it built. And what share of all of Nash County citizens will have to put in that. So it's kind of like trying to, I know it's hard to do now, but trying to decide what share all the citizens, the city of Rocky Mount, and all the other small towns that will have to contribute to getting this on the ground.
Yeah, it is going back to what Jonathan mentioned about the crystal ball, it is a little bit of that because it'll really depend on how much of those grant dollars we get. And it'll also, depending on the entity, if it's an authority or the district, they will essentially assume, quote, assume that debt. But the county and the other stakeholders are the backers of that. So, and like Mr. Boone said, you can put in, the county could elect to put in money, so that would be where the citizens would be all affected, I suppose. But the way it should operate, aside from seed money going forward, would be, you know, that debt would be factored into the user rates, and those user rates would be set appropriately to, you know, to be adequate enough to charge just the users of the facilities, you know, enough to cover any kind of debt, operation and maintenance, all the staff, all those costs that would be in the entity. Those user rates should be enough to cover those and not affect the rest of the county.
Okay. That consume that debt. Now that statement.
Yeah.
As to, that's an option.
Yes.
So let's remember that.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Other questions? Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, sir. I know we talked about, there's a lot of unknowns at this point, and there is. This is kind of a fluid project that we're working on, and there's a lot of things that it's going to determine what the next steps are. But there's a couple of clear things, and help me out and correct me, please, if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. There are available credits now from the Tar-Pamlico River Basin,
yes,
effective July of this year, 2025. And by the timeline that you presented to us in our meetings, by July of 2025, we need to have our entity governing body decided on what we're going to do is based on your plans. And if I understand you correctly in the meetings, the goal of that is so that those available credits we could apply for. Because once those credits are gone, the option of joining the TAR Potomac River Association is no longer existent. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so then that's our most cost-effective way to get into this, correct?
Yes, if you elect to join the association, then this is something we still need to talk about with them, obviously, a little bit more, and it's got to go to a vote and all that stuff. I don't know if there's a sort of a promissory note, hey, we're in the process, but they've indicated to us that they're not going to give any of the credits just to a thought. It's got to be something more concrete than that. So what exactly that is, I don't know. Is that a full-blown, you've got to be organized at the state level, or is it, hey, the study's been completed and all stakeholders are moving forward? I don't know exactly what that next step is, but I know they've said it's got to be concrete.
But if we've got the governing body formed and we present to them, then we're in a legal situation where we could apply for those.
Yes, sir.
Now, we're also in competition to other municipalities and everything out there. So the longer this stays out there, the quicker it can get taken up, correct?
I would say.
So if we delay this, then we're delaying our opportunity to have the most cost-effective way to engage into this partnership.
That's right, to get the credits.
Okay. And then, just by doing this, we haven't done anything other than given the opportunity to get into this partnership. And also, I've had conversations with our House Representative Alan Chestnut and our Senate Representative Lisa Barnes, and they both agree and like the authority aspect in which the resolution has been presented to us and the municipalities. And that also, in conversations with them, by going this way, it's going to put us in a situation to where Albie mentioned the grants earlier, all the different avenues of grants. It gives us the ability to apply for all those grants, not just certain ones. And there's a scoring system on these grants, correct?
On the state level, yes, sir.
Okay, and so with the scoring system, by us being a regional wastewater facility, then that's going to move us up the ranking and get us the chance to getting more grants versus attacking this from a county or attacking this from a municipality standpoint. Is that correct?
Yeah, the authority or entity would have a better chance to maximize your grant dollars.
And then, so that's the consideration here. I'd ask the board to consider is about speeding this up, to stay in the timeline with our consultant, Wooten, to have this complete by 2025 of July, so that we, number one, we've already put a legislative request in for $100 million for this. Don't know if we're going to get it. And also, once we form this entity, then we can start pursuing grants to get the funds in, which will reduce everybody's share of cost into this before it becomes a reality.
This is turning into a roundtable discussion. The only thing I'd like you to do, Brian, is I like to manage expectations. So when we're talking about applying for grants, realistically, I would think the next grants we would apply for would likely be to assist us in developing, once we've got the preliminary engineering report approved, we're actually developing some construction plans. Because until we know what we're building, we know what technology we're using, we know who the users are.
Yeah.
We've really got some idea of what the project actually looks like. What is it going to look like on the ground? Then we still don't have a project.
Right.
So when we're going to these entities and we're looking for funding, they're going to want to know, what are you asking for funding to build? And other than saying a wastewater plant with a capacity of 1.99 MGD, we're going to need something a little more concrete, I feel like, than that before we're actually seeking. Outside of the state appropriation, that's a little bit different animal. But maybe before we go to DWI or maybe we go for the USDA, we're going to have to be able to show them, roll out the plans. Here's the proposal. Here's the specs. Here's what we're building. Here's what it'll look like. So talk to us a little bit more. You alluded to it in the timeline, but in terms of when we're looking at grant dollars, this is probably more than one. This is probably a series of asks.
Yes. Oh,
So
yes.
when we get to the big dollars, outside of looking to our elected representatives, we've got to have something a little more substantial than a preliminary engineering report to pursue those dollars.
Yeah, the preliminary engineering, and I was trying to go back to the timeline, but I went forward, so I'll leave that where it is. But yes, you're right. The more you have, the better position you're going to be in for any kind of funding. So, Yeah, what you currently are working on now is the PER, and you speak of series of funding. We've already been, this is the second iteration. You all were funded for the initial MRF study. Now you were funded for the, what they call planning funding. And the one thing I didn't mention, and I should have mentioned, and Jonathan reminded me, so right now, that planning dollars, $400,000 is what the grant was. A portion of that is being used for the PER. There also is remaining dollars for that to start the process, and that's what the very top line there, begin preliminary design, maybe up to 30%. We'll see how the money runs. But there's additional dollars remaining in the $400,000 can get us started on some of those drawings and whatnot that Jonathan was talking about. So that is going to help us the farther we are down the road with that to be in a position to get the funding. I will say that once you have the PER done, though, that's really the critical step, though, in terms of that's your roadmap, and that does tell the entities that, hey, they're serious about this. The farther you get along, the more serious they think you are, though, and so it does help for sure. But again, once we get past the PER, those 4 items up top it's going to be sort of everything trying to work at the same time, and it's a little bit. We mentioned this in the meeting last week. A little bit of the chicken and the egg. You know, you really got to have all things going simultaneously at the same time. The farther you can get along, the better off you're going to be in terms of the funding, no question. And I think Commissioner Howell mentioned it before, the regional aspect of this is going to be a huge player as well. If the county were going at it alone, saying we want to do this wastewater system, that's one thing. Because it's a regional system, and that's a really big buzzword in today's world, that is going to help also with the funding. So the farther you can get along with the concept of the regional aspect, the better off you're going to be with the funding, being able to secure the most amount of funding. So, good point.
Commissioner Davis?
Mr. Boone brings up very good points. And the point I want to make clear today is, and I don't mean this disrespectful, because since I got on this board, I've done all I could do for the southern part of the county. And this board has done all they could do. But what we're being pushed here today is, from one commissioner particularly, is we've got 3% of our population in the county pushing us to sign a resolution that was developed by a General Assembly member, which has nothing to do with this whatsoever. The General Assembly doesn't even get involved in this. And I would never agree, my district is on the other end of the county, but we got to look at the whole county. Mr. Arrington's district's on the other end of the county. Commissioner Wilkins is all in Rocky Mount. Commissioner Belfield is all in Rocky Mount. And I would never vote in favor of something that is one-sided as this thing sits right now, over 3% of the population's needs. I just can't do that. I'm elected by a district, but I work for the whole county. This resolution that's out there does not represent what the end responsibility will be. It's got to match what the end responsibility will be. And if it's going to be spread throughout the whole county's got to have some kind of say-so in this. And it has got to be by how you elect the district or the authority members. I'm glad our engineer understands where we really are. I'm glad our staff, and thank the Lord for Mr. Boone, understands where we really are. But passing a resolution because we've got a town with 577 people and a town with 939 people want us to, we can either work together to get this done, but don't push us in trying to do something, getting us to do something that is not the right thing to do for the residents of Nash County. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other comments?
Yes, sir. Little difference of opinion in Commissioner Davis. I just like for the citizens and the staff and the other board members to consider that we've allowed a town in our county to be on a moratorium for over 20-plus years. So I don't think we're rushing anything here. I think patience has been a long time coming, and I think it's time for us to act. And we've talked a lot here about economical development, And again, we've already moved forward with putting economic development in Middlesex. We're proposing additional economic development in Middlesex, but we don't have the sewer flow. So either this board's going to have to step up and help Middlesex buy additional wastewater gallons. It's going to run excess of $10 million minimum, or we're going to have to look at another alternative, which is a wastewater treatment facility that can be something that can be sustained long-term, not just for that, but also for the county, which would allow additional growth for the county to include more economic development in industrial and commercial throughout the southern end of the county. So you got to look at either the small picture or the big picture. But we've already moved forward, and we've already made a commitment to do this, and we've already got funds and loans that we've taken out as a county and put our citizens financially responsible on the economic development. So we need to follow through and make sure that we complete this project and get the wastewater facility there that is needed to support economic development in Nash County.
I just got one comment and a question. The comment is, anything we can do to grow the county benefits the entire county, whether it be in the southern part of the county, in the city of Rocky Mount, or the northern part of the county. Anywhere in the county, if we grow the county, then we're benefiting Mr. Arrington's district, Mr. Davis's district, Mr. Howell's district. We're benefiting the entire county. And I think that's what we're talking about here today, is this the primary driver for economic development? Then that's important for the county. So that's my comment. Now, my question is, on the June timeline, you talk about financial analysis and governance model. Explain to me exactly what that financial analysis would consist of.
Okay, yes, sir. Yes, that's going in and looking at what we were talking about earlier about trying to estimate what the user charges would be. In this case, as Commissioner Howell mentioned, the 5 users, what would they be charged? And really, we would break it down as a per 1,000 gallon usage. So if Middlesex needed 300,000 gallons a day, what would that charge look like? And so we're trying to get a high-level look at that. Again, a lot of things are up in the air at that point. You don't know how much grant dollars you may get, but we would look at it at 100% loan first, which would be the worst case. And then we would try to look at, okay, if we got this much grant, this is what you could expect. So it really is just trying to evaluate what the user costs would end up being and make sure it's feasible. You know, if it comes out and it ends up being, like it was mentioned earlier, somebody said $9 per 1,000, which, you know, that's probably reasonable, maybe a little high, but let's say it came out to $20 per 1,000. That all of a sudden is off the table. I mean, that's just not, that's the end. That's a non-starter, as they'd say.
Well, on the governance model, again, I'll state, we're not looking, I don't think we said this is an informational session.
Right.
Nobody's looking at any action today
Right.
on this matter.
Correct.
But would it be important to determine that governance model to apply for these credits from the Tar River Basin by June? And what would be the process to do that? Would the towns do it first? Would we follow the towns? And I just don't see what the objection would be to establishing that model to allow you to at least qualify for those benefits or those credits.
Yeah, you've kind of got two sort of competing things. In terms of the PER and getting that done with DWI and getting that approval to kind of continue on more of a, I guess, typical process, you don't need the resolutions and the entity form. You just need a memorandum of understanding. But because this is a little unique in that we're trying to get into an association, we need to determine a little bit more from them. We're in preliminary discussions with the association right now. But as I mentioned to Commissioner Howell, I do believe that they're going to want something, whether it be a full-blown where the Secretary of State has certified the entity, I don't know. We need to find that out. but they're going to need something concrete that says this is happening, because they're not going to allocate something to an entity that's not going to be real. So that's where the timeline, there's sort of a convergence there of the timeline of we need to get it done in order to get that done potentially, but we need to find out a little bit more to how far along they're going to make the entity go. Is it enough to have the PER done and a memorandum of understanding, for example? Maybe, but I don't know.
Well, your timeline for the governance option is June.
Correct. And that was just to lay them out and to have it decided, we're going to go one way or the other, and have a MOU developed, a memorandum of understanding developed. That's what we were talking about there. So we're not saying, originally, we weren't thinking of the Tar-Pamlico situation when we developed the timeline. So we were just saying, to get the PER done, all we need is that memorandum of understanding, which would determine at that point what we believe to be the best option for the county.
Well, just a minute, I don't know if we need a memo or resolution, whatever. I'm catching up on this thing because I don't know much about it.
Right.
But it sounds to me like to get those credits or lose those credits, you must establish something in the June timeframe. So something's got to happen before June in order to do that.
Yeah, we'll look into that a little bit more, and we can tell you a little bit more once we get into talking further with the association. But I do agree, there is a bill out there right now that, or not a bill, but it's the rules are being refined for the Tar-Pamlico River, and in July that's supposed to be adopted. And so I think what Commissioner Howell is talking about is you want to be the first one in line. And that may put a little bit more emphasis on the need to get it done.
Okay, Jonathan, let me get Commissioner Howell
Okay.
first because he had his hand up.
So, and to your point, I think Mr. Boone mentioned it as well, we haven't talked to the association yet, so there could be some discussions and something for the board to consider as well, for us to be able to join that association, even though the state requires certain discharge requirements on the nitrogen and phosphorus. They could require us to have more restrictions, so they could maybe have us join the associations, a more efficient system to be able to reduce the nutrients just discharging there, more favorable, or there could be fees associated with it. They could back look into having us pay the dues for the entire time the association's been open to catch us up as a member of that association. So there's a lot of things there that's fluid, and the quicker we can get in and the more prepared we are at that point, then the better chance we have of getting in the association. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jonathan?
So I just want to make sure that, so one of the potential stakeholders, we mentioned Spring Hope, whether they elect to move forward or not, they are already a member of the association. I think that's helpful, particularly if Spring Hope elects to participate in this project moving forward. And in terms of securing the credits, and again, I hate to keep saying, correct me if I'm wrong, because still there's questions that I don't know the answers to yet. We're still trying to get answers to some of these questions. But I don't know if there's anything magical about either a district or an authority initiating those conversations with the association. It could be the county. It could be an existing member of the association, Spring Hope, which, having Spring Hope participate and involved in those conversations as they move forward may give us a higher probability of success as we're approaching the association, as opposed to a new entity, whether that's a regional authority, whether that's just the county, approaching the association about an allocation. And to clarify, I think what Commissioner Howell was saying, as we're getting into that conversation, whoever the entity is, in all likelihood, if we were successful, is they're going to award us an allocation, X amount of pounds of nitrogen, X amount of pounds of phosphorus. This is how much you can discharge into the river. And then we've got to look at, well, how much wastewater are we planning to treat, and then we got to figure out what level of treatment we need in order to not exceed that allocation. So there's just a lot of moving parts in this, but I personally feel like we're in a much better position if Spring Hope is a part of this conversation moving forward, particularly because they're already a member of the association.
Commissioner Howard?
And one point in discussions that I've had with Spring Hope so far, the reason why they backed out of this and were not is because when it was originally looked at, the county was going to control this. And they feel like that they want to vote at the table as well, and that's why the authority that's been proposed was put out there. Each of the towns would have a member on the authority and have a vote, and then the county, the commissioners that have the most geographical location in this district or area that's going to be considered for the wastewater treatment facility in Southern Nash would also have a seat at the table. So the way it's proposed, and it can be changed, but the initial proposal was to have 2 commissioners from the county on the authority, and then each of the towns have a position on the authority. And they would be the ones, the governing body that makes decisions for this, since they're all involved in that area. So the county would still have input, it's just it wouldn't have controlling input. It would have a share of it.
Got to chime in and say one more thing. I feel like I need to defend staff and defend this board. But I will say from the very beginnings of our work on this project, I personally, as a member of staff, has never been in a conversation about the county controlling this project, which is why one of the elements of the planning study was to evaluate governance options. If there was ever a thought that the county was going to put their thumb on this project and not include any other stakeholders, we would not be having a discussion about governance options. So I understand there was some concern, and maybe that's what caused Spring Hope to pump the brakes. But I can say from a staff perspective, we've never had a conversation about this being a county-only project. The reason we started the MRF study is because we knew it couldn't be a county-only project, and we had stakeholders in the southern part of the county that needed help. And we felt like the county needed to be a party of that. But really, the entities most likely to benefit the most from this project, regardless of who funds it, are those towns. Bailey needs treatment capacity. They need treatment capacity. Middlesex is going to grow. They need treatment capacity. Spring Hope is in the 64 corridor. They need treatment capacity. If the county wants to build another industrial park, we do need treatment capacity. But that's not a make or break for us. I think that's something we're all generally supportive of, and we want to bring jobs and tax base to the county. But we've got some towns, Bailey particularly, needs treatment capacity. But I've never been involved in a conversation where it says the county's going to take this project and make it a reality and not include the towns. We absolutely have to work together, and the MRF study from the very beginning was all about a regional partnership.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Commissioner Davis?
I'd also like to dictate, I think I've been in every meeting concerning this, and there's never been any discussion whatsoever that the county was going to be in charge of this sewer treatment plant. The only reason it's ever come up is to try to help, number 1, Bailey, number 2, Middlesex, and Spring Hope just hasn't been receptive too much. Through begging, through the mayor, we were able to get them to the table to at least listen to what we were doing. But it's never been a county project. We don't want it to be a county project because it doesn't benefit the whole county. It's got to be a regional project. And of course, one thing, Mr. Boone, we've also looking at is City of Rocky Mount is certainly a very large member of that Tar-Pam River Association, and we'll have a big play in how this thing develops. So our relationship there, we must maintain also. But the idea of it being a county project really just blows my mind.
I'll just make one more comment.
Yes, sir.
It does benefit the whole county,
It does.
because if the county grows anywhere, it benefits the county. I think that's a fair statement. And it sounds like we have eliminated the county as one of the governance options.
Right.
And it sounded like in your presentation that the metropolitan option was not a good option. So where are we left?
Yeah, the Metropolitan Sewer District is an option. It's feasible, I mean, but it's a little bit harder
You
to cross.
didn't indicate it was the better option.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to do is just share some information there between the two, but the authority is more, I would say, is more popular, it seems, probably because it's a little easier threshold to cross. But no, either one is good. Just one has different powers than the other.
Well, listen, I'm not trying to take sides. I'm just trying to get to the end of the road.
Yes, sir.
And it sounds like the county's off the option list.
Yes, sir.
So we've got two options that we're looking at. And it sounds like, per your timeline, we need to establish that option by June. So would that be the charge of this board to agree on that option and whatever documentation supports that option, whether it be a resolution or whatever, assuming Spring Hope's on board, then would that be our charge as a board to move forward with that? I'm just asking this board. Commissioner Leggett?
I wonder, is there additional time needed? I feel like this is the first really detailed presentation we've had of this project, and I don't think that any member of this board is necessarily completely opposed to the idea, but I know me personally, I feel like that there's additional work to be done before we can get to that point.
Commissioner Davis?
I don't think we can sit here today and set a deadline to pick that option. We can pick that option when we have the facts that allow us to pick that option. And if we got them in June, that's great. But if we don't have them in June, we can't pick that option. And the biggest thing that we've got to have facts on is what is the cost and what is each entity's cost involved in that total cost.
Right. And that's what we're continuing to work on. So we're kind of in the middle of it right now. So that's
Well,
why it's
I don't sit on that committee, so I didn't establish this timeline. I assumed the committee established that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Other questions? Commissioner Arrington?
Yeah. Well, still to me, whichever option that we choose, the baseline is how we structure paying for the initial development of this system and how the county and the non-immediate beneficiaries from this system will help fund it, and whether this authority will assume debt that we put as a county, as a whole, put in there, and kind of deciding how that will be structured to a certain degree. And I think we all agree that any development that benefits one end of the county hopefully benefits all.
Yes, sir.
Other questions? Commissioner Wilkins?
At the next meeting, I would just like a more detailed, I guess, report or summation of how it's going to affect the Rocky Mount residents on the Nash County side, because it stands to reason Rocky Mount's going to lose revenue.
I don't think so.
Well, I'd just like to see how it's going to affect the Rocky Mount area.
Okay.
Commissioner Howard?
To Commissioner Wilkins' point, I have asked Jonathan to start doing a recap on each of these meetings and sending them back to all the Board of Commissioners so everybody's got visibility each time that they meet, so you have more exposure to this. But there'll be initial cost to all citizens in Nash County, but also with the economic growth as Middlesex, Bailey, and Spring Hope grow, we all as citizens in Nash County will reap the benefit of the property taxes being paid on all the new residents coming to the county. And I don't have the statistics in front of me, but if you go back and pull all the permitting, I know for the last month, 50% of the permits being pulled is in the southern end of the county. And I think if you look at it on a year basis, I think you'll see that that's coming from there as well. And once you get this water treatment facility in place and operational, you're probably going to see an explosion of growth in that end of the county, which is going to benefit the entire county because of the influx of people moving in and spilling over from Wake County. So the tax base will increase, which, if I'm correct, that goes to the general fund, so it gets shared through all county projects.
Other questions? Commissioner Davis?
At our next meeting, Brian, at our last meeting, there was a big emphasis on, and I didn't understand it at that meeting, I still don't understand it, but it was a big emphasis on the fact that this treatment plant was not for residential development. Middlesex stated that, basically Bailey stated that. Of course, Spring Hope is not involved other than the mayor attending the meetings at this point, but I don't understand why those statements were made, so I'd like to get more information on, are we developing a sewer plant for industrial and commercial growth? Because that's what was stated at the table the last time, and not for residential. But I don't see it that way, because I don't know how Bailey can grow without having more sewer for residential. So we really need to clear what they meant by that statement as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Howell?
Just to help Commissioner Davis on it, back in the June presentation that Wooten presented to the board, it indicates in there that for unincorporated areas, that the primary use of this facility would be used for industrial, commercial purposes.
Correct.
And within the city limits, Bailey is looking at using this for residential and commercial and industrial. Middlesex is looking at using this for commercial and industrial, and Spring Hope is considering using this for industrial, commercial, not residential.
And just to be clear on the treatment plant itself, the treatment plant will be able to handle any of those types. If it's industrial, there may be some pre-treatment that those particular industries might have to do. But in terms of the plant, it will accept residential, commercial, or industrial.
Don't understand that.
The other thing, I want to go back to Brian's slide, and Commissioner Howell mentioned, we'll continue to forward the board the meeting minutes from our meetings. But our next formal presentation, unless the board requests another presentation, would likely be, I'm assuming, is July, maybe August. Because July, we'll have to review the report, hopefully finalize the report. So you'll get an opportunity to come back and stand behind that podium and that microphone.
Right.
And do this at least one more time.
That's right.
Likely in August, before the report is ever submitted to the state and DWI for their review and approval. But we certainly will be happy to forward those minutes to the board so you can remain abreast of what the committee working on this project is doing and what we're discussing.
And hopefully, as that continues to march down the road, a lot of these things that are currently up in the air will settle down. And there's still going to be unknowns even in August, I'm assuming, but a lot better handle on exactly where things are headed at that point, for sure.
Okay, well, again, I'm back to the governance options. The county is out, so there's 2 left. Your timeline says June. Is it the intent of this board to try to meet that timeline? Commissioner Davis?
I repeat my answer. If the facts are available, yes. If they're not available, no.
Again, I don't sit on that committee, so I assumed the committee had made those type judgments before they established a timeline. So what is our next step?
I just want to clarify again. I don't think the intent was, certainly we can. We have the flexibility. So I'm not saying the board can't. I'm not saying the towns can't. That the committee would identify kind of like this preferred alternative. What is the organizational structure that seems most favorable to all the parties involved? I don't think the implication was, and again, not that we can't. So again, I want to repeat that. Not that we cannot move forward with a resolution for whatever the group decides and the towns and counties are supportive of. But the intent of making a recommendations part of the study is so we can signal what our intent is to the state. So they know we're moving forward and we've got buy-in, and there's generally some consensus about what this entity, whatever it ends up being, is going to look like. But it's not to say that we felt like we needed to have a resolution from each of those local governments signed and approved by the board. Again, we can, but we don't have to.
Right. That's correct. That was all, that original timeline, that was what that was pointing to as opposed to.
Just let's assume you had a resolution from the towns. What would we lose by supporting a resolution for a governance option that we choose?
one of the two? What are we committing to other than this is the organization that we want this to be? I'm directing that to you, Mr. Boone.
I would say you're committing to assuming some unknown liability to fund a project of some unknown scope and unknown cost that will be constructed at some unknown date.
So you would not recommend a resolution? If the towns approve a resolution, you would not recommend we do a resolution?
I am an engineer. I like numbers. I like factor of safety. I like certainty. But that's not to say we can't assume some risk and go ahead, and the board could certainly approve that resolution. But in the absence of the answers to some of those questions, you are approving a resolution not knowing what your future liabilities are related to this entity. I would love to see this project move forward. We would not have started on this project if we didn't want to see it move forward. But I also want to know, I don't want the board to put itself in a situation where you have some buyer's regret after we move forward on this project and you feel like staff didn't adequately inform you about what your risks are. If the board is happy to move forward and assume those risks and not know the answer to those questions, that is a board decision. That is not a staff decision. But as a member of staff, I want to give you as much information as I possibly can so you are making as the best decision. Nothing is certain, but you're making the best decision, the most informed decision that you can. And once I'm done that, that's the board's prerogative to move forward or not.
Mr. Chairman, until I get that information, I'm not ready to move forward.
Well, we're not going to do anything today.
Okay, but you asked,
This is
so,
just an informational session.
yeah.
Yeah, we're just trying to catch up with the two board members that are on that committee. I think I stated that previously. We're just trying to catch up and see where we are. So what's the next step for this board? What's the recommendation? Commissioner Davis?
I think the recommendation is plain and clear. We need to follow the staff. We've got an excellent staff. We've got a staff that fully understands this, and we make our decision based on staff recommendations on just about everything we do. Occasionally, politics gets involved in some of our decisions, but the Lord help us if we decide to make a decision on this without following the staff recommendation. It's happened before in the state, and it turned out to be disastrous. I hope we'll do the smart thing and give the staff and the people that we hired, excellent consultants, to guide us through this, and let them guide us through this in the manner they want to, and don't be pushed into doing something that's not right for any portion of Nash County.
Any other comments?
I would just, excuse me.
Commissioner Arrington, go ahead.
Well, Jonathan, he had sent out all the board members' phone numbers and people who are serving on the board. I would suggest that I'm after the staff, the committee, coming back to us, you know, our next meeting or whatever, and all the concerns that I have, I need to make those known to one of those committee members so that hopefully my question will be answered.
So before we move on, can we just ask then that if any board member has questions, concerns, they direct them to staff and through that committee, and that information be provided to all of us?
Right.
Yes.
Okay? Commissioner Leggett?
When does the committee meet again? When does this committee meet again?
It's a date in April. I can send you the date.
It's in April. All right.
Yeah, mid-April.
Commissioner Howell, do you have a question?
Yes, I was just going to ask or make a recommendation that maybe Mr. Boone presents to us each meeting until, if it's June we do this, that's fine, but whenever we get all the information we need to satisfy all of our answers, then he keeps presenting that to us at each meeting to keep us abreast of what's going on. And is there any restrictions other than having more than 3 commissioners there, but is there any restrictions in preventing anybody else from coming to the meeting on staff or commissioners, as long as we stay below the 3 threshold?
I'm not aware of any.
You've heard that request. Is that something you?
To
can
update the
do?
board monthly,
Yeah,
be happy to do that.
okay. That would be an agenda item. Commissioner Davis?
Next meeting is 2:30 on the 22nd of April in Bailey.
Okay. Well, then that would eliminate the need for an April 7th update, since your next meeting is not till the 22nd.
Well, there may be some things, again, this is.
Okay, well, let's just do it every month then, if you've got some things to offer.
Right.
Okay? Any other questions? Okay, this has been a healthy discussion, it's been an informational discussion, and it's been a civil discussion. And I appreciate that, I know every member of this board appreciates that, and we look forward to more information on a monthly basis.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, do we have any other discussion today? Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, that concludes our business for today. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Wilkins, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Howell. All in favor indicate by saying yes.
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 Opposed, no. Motion passes. We're now adjourned. Have a good day.